LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the January 1st edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me and Happy New Year on the first day of 2024. I'll be taking the 10 best, most newsworthy clips I could pick out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, and CNN and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. As you can see from the title of the video, the main topic is Trump ineligible to run for president under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment? We've had two states now declare him ineligible, Colorado and Maine, and you'll see especially some coverage of the Secretary of State of Maine, Shayna Bellows, disqualifying him just this last week in some of the clips I'm going to show you. By the way, down in the video description, you can see short summaries of all 10 clips. And also there's a notation there that I'm going to be showing you the text of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which, I don't know, it's kind of political comedy that you're going to get the text of the 14th Amendment or Section 3 of the 14th Amendment from me now, but it was not shown on any of the news analysis shows. 4 of the 5 of them actually covered the topic. None of them showed you what I'm showing you right here. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, basically saying no person shall be a senator, representative in Congress, elector, president, vice president, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by 2/3 vote of each house, remove such disability. So that's what the 14th Amendment says. If you have engaged in insurrection or given aid and comfort to those who do, then you can't be an officer of the United States who's taken an oath to support the Constitution. Now, there are a whole bunch of issues with that, and I'll get to that later when I get to the news summaries and some of the comment or the analysis clips that I have. I think actually CBS News, Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan and David Becker do the best job really analyzing the issue, but I'll talk about it a little more. That was, by the way, just a screenshot of this ACLU Constitution here that I send out to the viewers who support my program financially. Either right under the video, there's a link to my Patreon page. If you donate as little as $5 a month, I send you this weatherproof vinyl #LiberalViewer sticker and this ACLU Constitution with a your rights with the when the police stop you section in the back. All of that for $5 donation per month on Patreon, or even a one-time donation on PayPal for $5 with a shipping address in the United States. I will send you both these things, and then you can look at what is it? I just did a scan of page 30 and 31. That's what I was showing you, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and you can read it yourself. But I also have an additional political comedy clip for you all. This is from, like I said, the last episode of Outnumbered on of 2023. Where Julie Banderas, the host, I think when talking about a very racially charged topic, the possibility of giving reparations in Chicago, that the mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, had proposed as a way to maybe get rid of some of the poverty that causes crime, I guess, was the argument. But she used a very unfortunate phrase after making a really race baiting argument, used a very unfortunate phrase for the other political comedy clip I promised, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Progressive Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson says the government has to get more involved in ending the city's out-of-control crime crisis by paying out reparations. Since Johnson took over from his predecessor, Lori Lightfoot murders have dipped in the Windy City. But total violent crime, robbery, carjackings, aggravated battery, all up over the past year. Now claiming reparations payments to descendants of slaves, he says will help address Chicago's, quote, cycle of violence. Watch.
What I've built within these last 7 months, in order for us to have a better, stronger, and safer Chicago, it really requires the full force of government. We have stood up an entire office dedicated to reentry. So individuals who are returning to our communities who have been incarcerated because of failed policies, we'll have a welcoming space for them. I've added a $500,000 for restoration and reparations to address, again, the cycle of violence, which looks like school closings, closing of mental health facilities, of which I've invested in now. And so in order for us to build a better, stronger, safer Chicago, it requires investments. And that's what this budget has done.
Okay, Julie, let me get this straight right now. Okay, so he's asking for billions of dollars from the federal government to deal with the migrant crisis in Chicago. But let's hand out money for reparations because that's going to fix the crime problem. I'm not sure where the disconnect here is.
Okay, first of all, I'm not, a mathematician, but he is putting $100 million toward crime prevention, $500 million toward reparations. He wants to figure out how to properly compensate descendants from slaves, but he's not actually paying attention. He's ignoring the crime problem, and it's not. So basically what he's saying is that the crime problem is what? Due to all the blacks in the city, so let's pay them off and maybe they'll stop committing crimes. What is he trying to say? It's absolutely ridiculous. How about giving that money? How about giving that money to the police and actually empowering the cops? I know you're laughing.
No, I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at the fact that you
ridiculous.
nailed it.
What? I mean, I hate to call, I got to call a spade a spade. It's ridiculous.
I'm sorry. Spot on.
Spot on. David Webb, the conservative radio host, he is not there to really give the perspective of someone from a marginalized community who might say, Julie Banderas, why are you saying you hate to call a spade after making a racially charged argument that the mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, is saying that we have to pay off blacks because they're causing all the crime, which I didn't see that in the clip from Brandon Johnson on CNN. So I don't know, maybe because it was in the middle of the New Year's weekend. I even did a Google search for like Julie Banderas spade on in the last week on Google, and like nobody seemed to notice that she used that. Not only did you say I gotta call a spade, you said I hate to call a spade, and that seemed like a really bad choice of phrasing on her part, which I just thought I would pick out for you as my political commentary or my political comedy clip, because I thought it was kind of amusing that she used such a bad turn of phrase. But you can let me know what you think in the comment section. And now I'm going to get to the news summaries, and they did some interesting things again this week. Last week I was criticizing the programs for not really covering the news on Christmas weekend. Like a couple of them, or a few of them, took it seemed like they took the weekend off. 3 of the 5 really, but that is not the case for CBS News Face the Nation this week. It's still the case for Meet the Press, I'll talk about when I get to it. But Face the Nation, they focused on the immigration crisis at the southern border, but they actually did a much better job than like what you see like all day, every day on Fox News, where they call it Biden's border crisis. And they actually talk about like the things that the U.S. About the U.S. Policy and procedure on asylum and immigration that are drawing people, and also what are pushing people to come here, the problems that they're having, which is a big part of, because a lot of these people are refugees, some political asylum seeking refugees, some more like economic refugees, because the United States has such a better economy than so many other countries in the world, even in like Europe. And anyway, I'll talk about that more, especially when I get to the Fox News Sunday news summary. But here's The CBS News Face the Nation news summary from host Margaret Brennan and then their reporter Camilo Montoya-Galvez on the immigration situation at the southern border over in this clip.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We have a lot to get to on this New Year's Eve, but we want to begin with the dire situation at the southern border. New Customs and Border Protection data obtained by CBS News show that agency is on track to process more than 300,000 migrants, an all-time monthly high. That includes record numbers of families and children. Meanwhile, cities, states, and federal law enforcement report being overwhelmed as the ripple effects spread from border communities to all across the country. And for the latest, we are joined now by CBS immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya-Galvez. Camilo, you've done some extraordinary reporting on this. Can you tell us what is really driving the sharp increase and who is making up the majority of migrants?
I think, Margaret, the more precise answer I can give you is that the push and pull factors that historically have driven migration to the U.S. have intensified to a degree that I don't think we have ever seen in U.S. history. We have a relatively stable economy here with many job openings, and that is driving a lot of migration. We also have an immigration system that is massively backlogged and cannot determine quickly who qualifies for asylum and who does not. That also attracts migration. Those are the pull factors, but we have very powerful push factors as well. Deteriorating political and economic conditions in countries like Venezuela, in countries in Africa and Asia are driving record numbers of people to the U.S. This is truly an unprecedented crisis of humanitarian proportions along the border. We have never seen this before. 250,000 migrants are being processed each month at the U.S.-Mexico border.
That's breathtaking. And this is a hemisphere-wide crisis.
That's right.
The president sent the Homeland Security Secretary and Secretary of State to Mexico to press Mexico's president to help police that border. What did they achieve?
Well, I was told that U.S. officials asked Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador to increase enforcement within the interior of Mexico to stem the flow of migration further south at the Guatemala-Mexico border and effectively divert migrants away from northern Mexico and along the U.S. border. And it really does illustrate the outsized role that Mexico plays in how we deal with this incredibly complex and vexing problem. We are relying on Mexico, Margaret, to do much of this border enforcement and immigration policy because they really are the key player in this debate. They have to accept the returns of non-Mexicans, and that is a big diplomatic task for the Biden administration.
And we know that some of those ports have actually been shut down
for commercial and vehicle traffic, which is a huge economic consequence for Mexico and the U.S. Correct.
Well, exactly. This is just beyond humanitarian crisis. We are at so many levels of complexity now. Texas's governor has signed into law that hasn't yet taken effect, but it would in March.
That's right.
The ability for his state law enforcement to stop migrants and arrest them. Texas has vowed that they will fight this all the way to the Supreme Court, but the Biden administration is going to take them on.
This will be one of the most important legal clashes on immigration in 2024. The Justice Department has already told Texas that this law will undermine relations with Mexico and prevent federal officials from enforcing federal immigration laws, including U.S. asylum law, which allows migrants on U.S. soil to request asylum, even, Margaret, if they enter the country illegally. This law not only allows Texas to prosecute and jail migrants on actions that are already legal on federal grounds, on federal statutes, but it also allows state judges to issue what are effectively deportation orders, even though Mexico has said that it will reject returns of migrants from the state of Texas. The Justice Department has given Texas until Wednesday to say that it will abandon plans to enforce this law as planned in March, but that is very unlikely to happen. Texas, I think, will try to implement this law, so we should expect a prolonged legal battle, Margaret.
Potential development as soon as this Wednesday.
That's right.
So that brings us back to what's happening here in Washington, or what's not happening, frankly, with lawmakers talking about trying to put together some piece of legislation to change immigration laws, which haven't really been updated in decades.
Since the 1990s.
Right. And to put in the funding that President Biden has asked them for. Where are we in those negotiations?
Well, the White House, importantly, is currently entertaining some sweeping border restrictions, including an authority to expel migrants when Border Patrol is overwhelmed and to suspend asylum law, just like the Title 42 pandemic era policy that ended earlier this year, to convince Republicans to get on board in terms of backing additional aid to Ukraine. That would have been unthinkable just 3 years ago. And it speaks to the situation we're in at the U.S.-Mexico border. I think that these talks will intensify in January. They could very well collapse because we are dealing, after all, with immigration. And as you know, Congress has been desperately gridlocked on this issue for decades. But I think there are two different factors here at play that could make this a different scenario. The White House really wants aid to Ukraine, and it is under tremendous political pressure to do something new at the U.S.-Mexico border.
Camilo, we'll continue to follow your reporting, and we're going to turn now to one of those negotiators involved in the talks. That is Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who is with us from Seneca.
And I don't have a Lindsey Graham clip because like I said, I'm going to show this great analysis of the 14th Amendment issue from Margaret Brennan and David Becker on Face the Nation yesterday. But that was also a great analysis of the border issue, much better, like I said, than I see on Fox News all the time. I don't think you've ever seen Fox News point out that one of the reasons that we are getting so many immigrants is because of the great Biden economy, especially compared to a lot of other first world countries. Like I was saying, as a draw, it's a lot. There are a lot more jobs and economic growth in the United States, even lower inflation in the United States than a lot of European countries right now, and certainly better than the South American countries and countries in Africa and the Middle East are having a lot of privation, poverty, as in the post-pandemic world economy, which President Biden has actually steered the United States through pretty well. And then that was one of the things that's pushing people. Another one of the draws from our U.S. immigration policy is the fact that Congress hasn't given the funding to process people who are seeking asylum, to like the administrative law judges that work out the asylum claims. And so that's actually more Congress's fault. And anyway, I thought that was a really great analysis of the immigration problem at the southern border, its actual causes, more so than the flogging on the Biden administration I usually see on Fox News. But I'm going to move on to the next news summary. Sorry, there are kittens surrounding me doing silly things here. I'm going to show you a bonus Cheech and Chong, the kittens clip at the end. Maybe I'll have a chance to show you some live shots of Cheech and Chong. If they get closer to me, I'll pick them up. But and I also wanted to thank Matthew, one of my most loyal viewers, for a super chat contribution that I saw earlier while I was talking. Matthew said, thank you for keeping me informed and entertained for all these years. Happy New Year. And Happy New Year to all of you. I think I said that at the beginning of the program, but I appreciate my loyal live viewers, the people who watch the recorded show. I wish there were more of you, but I appreciate those of you who've stuck with me through all the years, or who are maybe just starting off recently and enjoying the political commentary and media criticism I'm adding to these Sunday show clips. And now I'm going to move on to the next news summary. This is ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, that kind of covers the news of the week really briefly at the beginning, but then does this thing that I've talked about a lot about media bias, how, Fox News has this partisan political bias, because they're not really a journalistic organization. They're a propaganda outlet of the Republican Party, which is what they were created to be by Roger Ailes, as you can see in Oh, this book right here, The Loudest Voice in the Room by Gabriel Sherman, tells you the whole history of how Fox News was created to be a propaganda outlet of the Republican Party. But the rest of the media does have other biases, like biases towards simplicity, towards like both sidism, towards sensationalism. Like, if it bleeds, it leads. I've talked about that before. Like if there's a shooting on Friday or Saturday, it'll be on the Sunday shows. But if it's like earlier in the week, it fades away. And but they also have this bias towards their exclusive guests. All the media has this, like, if they have an exclusive guest, they're going to spend a lot of time making that really newsworthy because that's like what they have that nobody else has, to get the clicks, to get the the advertising dollars or whatever it is that keeps the media running these days. But that kind of happened on This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Jon Karl had this exclusive interview with 3 Republican women who broke with the Trump administration in their 3 Republican women in their 20s. Some of whom you'll recognize from the January 6th committee hearings here, and well, maybe all 3 of them. But you'll see Jon Karl starts off with like the real news of the week very briefly, talking about Trump getting kicked off the ballot in Maine and Nikki Haley having a problem answering what was the cause of the Civil War, and even record immigrants at the southern border and airstrikes in Ukraine, like the worst Russian airstrikes on civilians in Ukraine since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But that's all like compressed right at the beginning, and then off to this really deep analysis of these 3 Republican women in their 20s who broke with the Trump administration, which seems like over coverage because of the exclusive guest, as I was describing, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. I hope you all had a chance to unwind and to enjoy some time with family and friends over the holidays as we prepare to celebrate the new year. But even as the country relaxes just a bit, it's been quite a week in politics, a foreshadowing perhaps of the year to come. Maine became the second state to say Donald Trump should not appear on the ballot as a presidential candidate, potentially teeing up another landmark case for the Supreme Court. Nikki Haley stumbled after a voter asked a simple question about the cause of the Civil War. The influx of migrants over the southern border hit yet another record, and Russia launched its most aggressive airstrikes on Ukraine since invading the country nearly 2 years ago. We'll get to all of those stories, but we begin today with a This Week exclusive as we approach the 3-year mark since the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. My conversation with 3 young women who worked in Donald Trump's White House and answered the call when it came time to tell the truth about what they witnessed when Trump tried to upend the 2020 presidential election. Former January 6th committee Vice Chair Liz Cheney singled out these young women as truth tellers after they provided some of the most compelling testimony of her committee's historic hearings.
And I will tell you, it is especially the young women. Young women who seem instinctively to understand the peril of this moment for our democracy. And young women who know that it will be up to them to save it. And I have been incredibly moved by young women that I have met and that have come forward to testify.
For a Republican, speaking the truth about Donald Trump, a man who has vowed retribution against those who have betrayed him, can be dangerous, especially if you worked for him. Despite that, these young women went public, even as many of the men they worked with, some in more senior positions, stayed silent or actively enabled and excused Trump's actions. Now, for the first time, they sat down together to tell the story behind their story and the threats they face and still face today. It's a fascinating conversation.
Some of the most compelling testimony of the January 6th committee came from women in their 20s who were working just steps away from the Oval Office when the pro-Trump mob stormed the U.S. Capitol. Sarah Matthews, the deputy press secretary, who was just 25 years old when she resigned that night.
I motioned up at the TV and I said, Do you think it looks like we're effing winning? Because I don't think it does.
And Cassidy Hutchinson, the 24-year-old top aide to Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, whose riveting testimony was front-page news across the country.
She testified today that a number of people inside that White House knew in the days leading up to January 6th that this could be dangerous.
Jaw-dropping testimony here in Washington.
This testimony is stunning.
A complete game changer.
A portrait of a president who was completely and utterly out of control.
And there was the woman who brought them both to the committee, Alyssa Farah Griffin, who left the Trump administration on December 4th, 2020, after serving multiple high-level roles.
Both of these women made such a profound impact on how I ended up viewing all of this. And, you know, I wouldn't be here with you today if it wasn't for Alyssa and Sarah and Liz Cheney and January 6th committee.
So yeah, I pretty much pre-criticized that clip before I showed it about the excessive focus on the 3 Republican women in their 20s that they had the exclusive interview with. Oh, this is Chong here. I have Chong for a little bit of a live appearance. He's not purring now, but I'm going to show you a clip at the end where he purrs a lot. So for, yeah, the kitten fans out there, here I have one of my kittens. Cheech is over there. I might be able to pick him up a little later and show him to you. I will put Chong down and get to the next news summary, the third of 5 here. This is Fox News Sunday. Mike Emanuel is in for Shannon Bream this week with Lucas Tomlinson. And you'll see they spend some time talking about breaking news of the U.S. Navy has engaged some Houthi ships off of Yemen. And I guess that is important breaking news. But then they spend a lot of time talking about Biden's economy, how it seems like it might be getting better, but people hate the Biden economy anyway based on polls. Now, remember, these are the polls that said that Hillary Clinton was going to win in 2016 and that there was going to be a big red wave in 2022. And a lot of things don't go exactly the way the polls say. And I'm not saying polls are always wrong, but this is definitely more on the Republican propaganda side. Like I was saying, talking about this book over here, The Loudest Voice in the Room, earlier, that I think it kind of proves my point here. Mike Emanuel and Lucas Tomlinson trying to explain to you why Biden shouldn't get any credit for the better numbers in the economy in the last year or so. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that biased news summary from Fox News Sunday yesterday together over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington. On this last day of 2023, we begin with news out of the Middle East. U.S. Navy helicopters sunk 3 Iranian-backed Houthi gunboats in the Red Sea today after coming under attack when responding to a distress call from a Danish-owned cargo ship. A 4th gunboat managed to escape. Iranian-backed forces had struck the same cargo ship Saturday with a missile. A U.S. Navy destroyer shot down 2 more ballistic missiles fired from a Houthi-controlled area of Yemen while responding to that attack. There have been more than 20 attacks by Houthis on international shipping since November 19th. All this amidst heightened tensions in the region over the Israel-Gaza war. Let's turn to Lucas Tomlinson live from St. Croix, where the president is spending his holiday with reaction. Lucas?
Mike, it's the first time U.S. forces have come under direct attack in the Red Sea, forcing them to return fire in self-defense. The U.S. Military Central Command says helicopters from the aircraft carrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower and destroyer Gravely returned fire, sinking 3 of those Iranian-backed gunboats, killing all crew members aboard. 1 managed to escape. Both helicopters returned to their ships unharmed, Mike.
Lucas, turning now to the economy in the new year, there were some encouraging numbers, but they don't seem to be resonating with Main Street or with voters. A majority have a negative opinion of President Biden's handling of the economy. What can you tell us?
Mike, the economy is one of the reasons President Biden's approval rating has plummeted, having the lowest approval rating of any president running for re-election since the end of World War II. A majority of Democrats do not want him to seek re-election, and a vast majority of Americans think he's too old for the job.
President Biden ended the year feeling upbeat about the economy.
All good. Take a look. Start reporting it the right way.
A recent Fox News poll says a majority of his own party disagrees. 61% of Democrats say the economy is in bad shape. 85% of independents agree. And only 14% of voters say the president's economic policies have helped them. About half say they have hurt them. In St. Croix, the president boasted one more great year in the books and listed a number of what he called his major accomplishments, saying he tackled inflation and lowered costs and created good jobs. He didn't mention the big year on Wall Street, the Dow finishing up nearly 14% higher and the S&P 500 increased by 24% over the past year.
It's been a better year, no question about it. Inflation has come down, Anita, from 9%. Now we're down to about 3.5% inflation. That's still too high for people.
While the rate of inflation has dropped from its 40-year high, many Americans are still feeling the pain of high prices. A recent report said Americans need to make an extra $11,000 a year to keep up with inflation. To pay the bills, Americans have racked up over $1 trillion in credit card debt.
Every average American knows when they stick their hand in their pocket under the Biden administration or Bidenomics, you have far less than what you had during the Trump administration.
When President Biden returns to Washington, he faces a grueling re-election campaign in 2024. Mike?
Lucas Tomlinson reporting from St. Croix. Lucas, many thanks. Joining us now is Council of Economic Advisors Chair Jared Bernstein.
And I don't have a clip of Jared Bernstein because it's not on my main topic about the 14th Amendment, whether Section 3 of the 14th Amendment disqualifies, makes Trump ineligible for running for president. But I pretty much pre-criticized that Fox News Sunday news summary from Mike Emanuel and Lucas Tomlinson trying to diss the Biden economy. Like, there are all these good numbers, but people still aren't happy about it. So the polls must be right and the numbers must be wrong, basically. I mean, there was inflation, and a lot of it had to do with the pandemic and the dislocations in the supply chain. And if you look at a lot of countries around the world, the U.S. did a lot better in terms of keeping inflation at bay and keeping the economy growing and keeping unemployment low. And I think there's actually a good chance by the time we get to November of 2024, since here we are in January 2024, it seems, for the first time that I've done my Monday Media Mix-Up, we actually are in 2024, an election year. And I think the chances are the economy is going to keep improving and people are going to increasingly feel it. And so Biden has probably gotten to the lowest levels of his approval rating right now. But you didn't really hear that on the Fox News Sunday news summary. And I don't know, maybe they're right and I'm wrong. You can let me know what you think in the comment section. But I have two more news summaries to get to, and the next one is actually the take the weekend off news summary, kind of like last week, NBC News Meet the Press with Kristen Welker. They concentrated on a topic. I mean, it is an important newsworthy topic. I don't know if they should have spent the whole news program on it, and to the extent that they didn't report on any news of the week. And as far as I know, this was recorded a week, 10 days ago. Who knows when they recorded this show, because there's no indication in the entire program that it was recorded, after Christmas that I can tell. But it's about the mental health crisis in the United States. And they have an interview with Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania talking about his public struggle with depression. And that's good. And I mean, all of the stuff in there is informative, and I think in the video description I put a link to the whole program, since The whole NBC News Meet the Press episode is uploaded on YouTube to the NBC News YouTube channel. If you want to watch the whole thing, because this is the only clip I have, is Kristen Welker spending 2 minutes explaining the premise of the special edition of Meet the Press over here.
Sunday morning, the U.S. Surgeon General calls it the defining public health crisis of our time. Mental health. 1 in 5 adults experience mental illness every year. Depression rates are at an all-time high. A third of adults report being diagnosed with depression sometime during their lifetimes, a figure that is rising. Nearly 50,000 Americans died by suicide last year, more than any year on record. The president says we are falling short.
In 2020, less than half of all adults with mental illness diagnosis receive care for it. Less than half. For children, the number's even worse. Nearly 70% of our kids who seek care for mental health or addiction cannot get it. For all those brave enough and strong enough to seek help, and I mean that, brave enough and strong enough to seek help, we have to do better.
In 2021, more than 12 million American adults thought about suicide. 1.7 million attempted it. The youth mental health crisis is overwhelming emergency rooms. Nearly 60% of high school girls reported persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. And for our nation's veterans, the crisis line is fielding a record number of cries for help. This morning, in a special broadcast on the nation's mental health crisis, we will have a conversation about all of it. How do we talk about mental health? How do we access treatment and care? And maybe most importantly, how do we pay for it? We start with Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman. Barely a month into his service in Washington after experiencing a stroke in May of last year, the senator checked himself into Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in February for clinical depression. I sat down with him in his Senate office. Senator
And like I said, I don't have any more clips from Meet the Press because they didn't really cover the news of the week or breaking news or anything about the 14th Amendment disqualification of Trump to be on the ballot in Colorado and Maine. But I mean, like I said, it's not an unimportant topic, and you can watch that whole John Fetterman interview and the rest of the program at a link I put under sources in the video description. I gave a specific link to the entire Meet the Press program free on YouTube on the NBC News YouTube channel, so you can look at that if you want. And then the final news summary here is just a little over a minute from Dana Bash on CNN State of the Union, mentioning some of the big stories of the week before getting to one of her newsmaker interviews, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch the final news summary together over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the State of our Union is finishing a wild 2023 and looking ahead to a pivotal 2024. We are 15 days from the Iowa caucuses, closing out a seismic week in an already extraordinary Republican primary. In a new filing last night, special counsel Jack Smith argued that former President Donald Trump is not immune from prosecution over his actions leading up to January 6th. Just 2 days after a second state moved to strike Trump's name from the ballot, citing a 14th Amendment clause that bars someone who tried to engage in insurrection from holding any office. Trump's legal team is expected to appeal those ballot decisions by Colorado and Maine on Tuesday, a source tells CNN, though it's not clear whether any of it has dampened his appeal with primary voters. Even his rivals say they don't think he should be disqualified. Instead, this week, the Republican candidates turned their fire on Nikki Haley, who is still cleaning up her comments at a New Hampshire town hall about the causes of the Civil War. Here with me now is New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, who...
And I don't actually have a clip of Chris Sununu because I'm actually going to show you the clip of Representative Jamie Raskin defending disqualifying Trump as ineligible to run for president because of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. as the Supreme Court of Colorado and the Secretary of State of Maine, Shayna Bellows, has done. But that's the last of the news summaries. I think CNN summed it up pretty well briefly. CBS News Face the Nation had a great summary of the causes of the refugee/migrant crisis at the southern border. Well, I've given my opinion on all 5 of the news summaries. You can let me know what you think in the comment section. And now I'm going to show you 3 different discussions of this issue of whether Trump should be disqualified from the ballot by Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which, as you recall, I showed you the full text of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment earlier, and there are a lot of issues as to whether it applies to the President of the United States, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch Margaret Brennan and David Becker give us the best analysis that you can see on any of the big 5 corporate outlets on this issue, but none of them actually show the text of the 14th Amendment, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment that I just showed you. That seems like something someone should have done and never did. But anyway, here's the best analysis, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
The Supreme Court is under growing pressure to quickly resolve the question of whether former President Trump is eligible to serve as president after 2 states, Colorado and Maine, have moved to strike him from the Republican primary ballot for allegedly supporting an insurrection. For more, we turn to CBS News election law contributor David Becker, the founder of the Center for Election Innovation and Research. David, it's always good to have you here to cut through the politics on this. Both of Maine senators, an independent and Republican, said they disagreed with this, even though they both personally voted to convict Trump in that Senate trial that involved the allegation that he helped to carry out an insurrection. Do you think that this decision to try to remove him from the primary ballot in Maine will stand up in court?
Well, it's a big question. The Supreme Court has never resolved this issue, especially with regard to a president, about what engaging in insurrection means under the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. Now, of course, as you just mentioned, both senators from Maine and a majority of the U.S. Senate, including 7 Republican senators, voted to disqualify Donald Trump from the presidency in February of 2021, as did a majority of the United States House, including 10 Republican members of the House. So it's clear that this is an open question. There's legitimacy to the question, and it has to be resolved by the United States Supreme Court. They're the final arbiter of what the United States Constitution means. And this 14th Amendment still exists. It might be inconvenient, but it exists, and it has to have meaning. It doesn't say convicted of insurrection. It says engaged in insurrection. And we've seen it applied in other offices, as in New Mexico just last year, to someone who was not convicted of insurrection, someone who was convicted of criminal trespass against the Capitol on January 6th.
Interesting, because the special counsel, Jack Smith, has not invoked insurrection in his federal case against the former president. In terms of what happened in Colorado, which was the first state to try to do this, to remove Trump from the primary ballot, in Maine, Chris Christie's not on the primary ballot. In New Hampshire, Joe Biden is not on the primary ballot. So does any of this really matter, I guess, is the question.
Well, I think it might matter, and certainly we need this resolved, because Donald Trump may very well end up being the nominee, and it's important to resolve this as quickly as we can and on the merits, so that the Republican Party knows if it has a qualified nominee, so that election officials can print their ballots, which has to be done well in advance, so the voters know what the choices are. But as you point out, it's not anti-democratic per se to disqualify someone from the ballot. Everyone under 35 is disqualified from being the president of the United States. Anyone who's not a natural-born citizen, for instance, Governor Schwarzenegger, former Governor Schwarzenegger of California, is not eligible to be president. Barack Obama and George W. Bush aren't eligible to be president because they've served 2 full terms. So this is working through the process. This is the beginning of that process. And fortunately, whether you agree with it or not, this process is moving quickly, and the Supreme Court now has it, at least in reference to the Colorado case. And hopefully they'll recognize, and I think they will recognize, the importance of them ruling clearly and quickly on this issue.
So Republican Representative Thomas Massey of Kentucky, who endorsed Governor DeSantis, was out there yesterday on the campaign trail, and he said Congress is the ultimate arbiter of whether we recognize electors from the states or not. He said, I could be inclined to not recognize electors from those states because he doesn't like what they're trying to do here. Can they? Can he do that?
Well, first of all, as we saw in 2021 on January 6th, Congress can't just decide to throw out the results of an election they don't like. Members of Congress aren't going to like the results in every single year, but that's not the way the Constitution works. And the Electoral Count Act, which applied in 2020 and 2021, was reformed last year.
Right.
And we now have an Electoral Count Reform Act. And this strengthens the guardrails. It requires more members of Congress to object, 20% of each House of Congress to object in order to send it into deliberations. It applies stronger presumptions with regard to the electoral certificates that are submitted by the executive, by the governors in the states, if they're done on time, December 11th and December 17th, as it occurs in 2024. So I think it's going to be very difficult for Congress to just dismiss that. Also important to note, the Congress that gets to decide this is the next Congress. It's not the Congress that's currently sitting. It's the Congress that's elected in November of 2024. So the majorities might shift. And so assumptions made now might not apply in January of 2025.
So yeah, like I said, that was the best analysis of the 14th Amendment issue from David Becker with Margaret Brennan on CBS News' Face the Nation. He pointed out, I mean, one thing he said wasn't quite accurate. He was saying that, it's not anti-democratic to put Trump off the ballot because the Constitution disqualifies other people from being on the ballot, but actually, it's still anti-democratic. It's just the Constitution is sometimes anti-democratic. Like, there are several things, well, there are a lot of things in the Constitution that says even if the majority of the people want it, they can't get it. There are all sorts of things in the Bill of Rights that the majority of the people can't, like, abridge your freedom of speech or apparently take away your right to keep and bear arms or to establish a state religion or to get rid of your free exercise of religion. Like, the majority can't do a lot of things, and they also can't elect a president who is under 35 or who wasn't born in the United States or in the case of like George W. Bush or Barack Obama has already been elected twice. Like, it's anti-democratic that we can't vote for Barack Obama for president in 2024, right? But it's definitely anti-democratic, but it's still constitutional because the Constitution, in a lot of ways, stops the majority from doing things they might want to do. That it's definitely anti-democratic, but that's just the way the Constitution works in a lot of ways. And David Becker that's the one thing he didn't quite explain correctly, because he said that is not anti-democratic, but it really is. It's just the way the Constitution works. But otherwise, I thought that was a really good analysis from David Becker, and it was the best analysis on the big five corporate outlets. The next best analysis, I have to say that even as bad as it was, at least Fox News Sunday had Juan Williams on to say a few of the things that David Becker said, that Trump engaged in, because if you watch Fox News every day for way too long, like I do, they've been saying that, well, and the Democrats are being anti-democratic by trying to get Trump off the ballot in Colorado and Maine. Well, actually, there were a couple conservative Federalist Society judges like Michael Ludig who were the intellectual basis behind this whole movement to put Trump off the ballot. So it's not really Democrats trying to do it. And, I showed you the 14th Amendment. You can kind of read it that way. I said months ago, I don't think the Supreme Court is going to say that, because there are like so many ways they can punt it and say that the president is not like one of the, it says senator, it says representative, it says anyone who's taken an oath of office to support the Constitution, but actually, if you look at your U.S. Constitution here, and you look at Article 2, Section 1, the very end, you see the president actually doesn't swear to support the Constitution. He only swears to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. So that he has a different oath. Although, can you really preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution without supporting the Constitution? That's kind of a bogus argument. And then I've been reading the live comments, and a lot of people, or there are some people talking about how Trump hasn't been convicted of insurrection, you have to be engaging in insurrection or giving aid and comfort to those who do. And it seems a lot more likely that even if he wasn't engaging in insurrection, he was giving aid and comfort. And there's nothing that says the person has to be convicted of a crime of insurrection. I mean, the due process for being convicted of the crime of insurrection is because if you're convicted of a crime, they can take away your liberty. But that is not quite as bad a punishment as just not being able to be president of the United States. That's should be like a much lower standard than being convicted of a crime. But anyway, in this next discussion here from the Fox News Sunday panel, you'll see first Mike Emanuel and Alexandra Hoff introduce the subject, never really telling you what the 14th Amendment says. Mike Emanuel starts off by saying that there's been a chorus of criticism of Colorado and Maine for kicking Trump off the ballot. And then you'll see first Molly Hemingway make this argument that he hasn't been convicted and it's anti-democratic. And then Juan Williams making a couple points, but not as much as you saw from David Becker. And anyway, I think I've talked long enough between the clips, and you can watch the Fox News Sunday. This is the only place where they discuss this issue on Fox News Sunday, and it's really biased, but not as bad as what you saw on ABC in the next clip, which I'll talk about a little more between the clips after we watch the Fox News Sunday clip together over here.
There is a chorus of criticism after Maine followed Colorado in pushing to remove President Trump from the 2024 presidential ballot on constitutional grounds. This as several other states have lawsuits calling for their own bans. Alexandria Hoff has more. Alex?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, the Colorado and Maine rulings that removed Trump from the ballot have been effectively put on pause pending appeals. And the Trump legal team plans to file their appeals against the two states on Tuesday.
My first and foremost obligation is my oath to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law.
In the already groundbreaking effort by some states to challenge former President Trump's ballot eligibility, Maine's decision stands out. Secretary of State Shenna Bellows unilaterally ruled to disqualify Trump. In Colorado, the decision came from the state's Supreme Court. According to the Trump campaign, quote, "We are witnessing in real time the attempted theft of an election and the disenfranchisement of the American voter." There are currently 13 states with lawsuits seeking to bar Trump from the GOP primary ballot. They all lean on a Civil War-era provision in the U.S. Constitution that bans a person engaged in insurrection from holding public office. An appeal by Colorado's Republican Party leaves interpreting the 155-year-old clause up to the U.S. Supreme Court. For now, Trump's name will appear on Colorado's primary ballot unless the high court sides with Colorado's earlier decision to kick him off.
I think that the court will see this for what it is, which is a distinctly anti-democratic effort to win this election in the courts rather than polling places.
California's Secretary of State Shirley Weber declined efforts to have Trump's name removed from ballots this week, telling the LA Times, quote, "I have to basically continue to abide by the rule of law. And for me not to do that, then I am no better than Trump."
Now, this is interesting. If you total up the states where Trump has either been disqualified from the ballot or where efforts to do so are pending, it comes out to 171 electoral votes. That is out of 538. Mike?
Alex, thanks very much. Let's bring back our panel, Julia, Molly, Juan, and Jeff. And so, Molly, this action in places like Colorado and Maine, is there a risk of this backfiring on Democrats and only helping former President Trump?
Well, I think clearly it already is backfiring. There's a general Democrat strategy to bring criminal or civil charges against the president, try to steal his family business, try to remove his name from the ballot. And this is viewed by a lot of Americans as just completely unfair and anti-democratic. In the United States, when we complain about other countries not practicing free and fair elections, usually that means that they have removed the opposition party from the ballot or they've tried to imprison opposition party members. But the idea that Americans won't be able to vote for the candidate of their choice, that does not reflect well on the Democrat Party.
I want to play a comment from a presidential candidate, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
It opens up Pandora's box. Can you have a Republican Secretary of State disqualify Biden from the ballot because he's let in 8 million people illegally, a massive invasion? I think that we win when we hold Biden accountable and talk about the issues that matter to the American people. So I think the Democrats, they want the election to be about all these other issues. They do not want to face accountability for their failed policies.
Juan, where are you on this ballot issue?
Well, I think, the problem here is that in the case of Maine, it was right in the law. I mean, she has the power as the Secretary of State, and she looked at the law and said that without a doubt, an insurrection took place in this country on January 6, 2021. There was violence at the Capitol, and she saw Donald Trump as having a key role in that insurrection, therefore said that he can't run on the Maine ballot. There was a similar finding in Colorado. So the problem for Republicans is they say, oh, this is a matter of politics. This is like, some third world country. You're pushing your political opponents off the ballot. But in reality, I can't think of another country where a political leader would try to overthrow the government and then come back and say, I'm running for president.
So,
I think most of them would say, put that guy in jail.
One, in this country, we practice something called due process.
Right.
If you believe someone has committed a crime, you charge them with a crime. You have a trial related to that crime. You convict them. What's happening in this situation is that you have unelected justices on the Colorado Supreme Court, all appointed by Democrats, and a Democrat Secretary of State in Maine unilaterally deciding to claim that a protest is somehow related to the former president and barring that person. That is not how our country operates in caring about due process, which is a constitutional protection.
We are a nation of laws that apply to all of us. To all of us. And in this case, the Constitution says that someone involved in an insurrection, this is civil rights after the Civil War, can't then run for office. So that's the law. That is the law. The problem for Trump and the Republicans is they can't get away from the stink of January 6th and Donald Trump's lies about January 6th. In fact, Trump is not even saying that he's not guilty. He's saying, you can't ask me about it because I was president. That's what he's saying.
All right, we've got more to get into. You guys are doing a great job. President Trump has many other court cases to deal with in the new year, while President Biden's son Hunter is also facing some legal troubles in 2024.
I love the pivot to Hunter Biden there from Mike Emanuel, which is one of the things you expect from Fox News. But kudos to Fox News Sunday and Juan Williams for injecting like a moment of truth in there about some of the things that you should consider when questioning whether Trump should be eligible to run for president after giving aid and comfort and support to an insurrection on January 6th. And you saw, like I said, Molly Hemingway there trying to make all the Fox News Republican arguments and especially attacking the Secretary of State of Maine, Shayna Bellows. They showed a clip of her. I'm going to show another clip of her in the clip after next. But at least Juan Williams pointed out, and this is like the first time I've seen this on Fox News in days, where someone pointed out that the process in Maine is first the Secretary of State has to rule on objections to people being on the ballot, and then it goes to the courts, and the Maine courts will then rule on what the Secretary of State said. They were like saying, well, in Colorado, it was the Supreme Court, although they're calling it a partisan Supreme Court because they were appointed by Democrats, all the justices in Colorado, although They don't really say that about the U.S. Supreme Court, appointed by almost all Republicans and 3 by Donald Trump, but of course not. But the other thing, I have to say that not only is the Secretary of State of Maine, Shana Bellows, required by the statute to make this ruling before it goes to the courts, and she's been mercilessly attacked on Fox News as a partisan Democrat. Lindsey Graham, in a clip I'm not going to show from CNN State of the Union, was it CNN? From one of the other news programs, he called her a partisan Democrat for saying the Electoral College was an instrument of white supremacy. And she was also actually executive director of the ACLU of Maine for several years. About a dozen years ago, I actually met her. She seemed like a very nice person. I spent like an hour with her in a hot tub in Florida in, I think it was June of 2012 or 2011, like 12 or 13 years ago. I met her and talked to her, and she seemed like a reasonable, nice person to me, and she put together a really well-reasoned argument as to why Trump engaged in insurrection and shouldn't be allowed on the ballot to run for president, and that will now be taken up by the courts in Maine, but eventually decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. And I was going to show you the worst discussion of this issue by pundits was actually on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. It was even worse than what you just saw on Fox News, because at least on Fox News they had Juan Williams bringing up some actual issues, but here they have Jon Karl and Politico's Rachel Bade. Juan Williams asks kind of an inane question here about, is the U.S. Supreme Court have to decide, do they have to weigh in soon on Trump's eligibility to be, to run for president? And her answer is like, well, whatever they do, they're going to get criticized. And this is a discussion kind of void of content, and even worse than you saw on Fox News, like I said. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch this penultimate news clip together for the program today over here.
And in terms of the legal battles here, we have Maine and Colorado trying to keep Trump off the ballot. The Supreme Court, I guess we're checking our inbox every few minutes. They've got to decide whether or not to weigh in soon.
You got to feel for John Roberts. The Chief Justice hates when the court is sort of drawn into the mudsling of politics. I remember reporting about how much he abhorred being part of, the first impeachment of Donald Trump, just overseeing the trial in the Senate. This is 100% going to put the Supreme Court smack in the middle of 2024, where John Roberts does not want it to be. And either way they rule on this, people are going to accuse them of being anti-democratic, because if they rule against taking Trump off the ballot and say that he can be on the ballot, then they're going to look like they're going against the Constitution. But if they knock it down, they're going to be looking like they're overturning the will of the people. So it's bad either way for him.
Okay, we don't have a lot of time, so I want to get to our predictions or most surprising thing that you expect in 2024.
So yeah, that was a really bad discussion of the issue. And Rachel Bade of Politico was like, either they're going to be anti-democratic if they kick him off the ballot and voters can't vote for him, or they'll be anti-democratic if they keep him on the ballot and go against the Constitution. But actually, as I was talking about before, keeping him off the ballot would be anti-democratic, like a lot of the Constitution is anti-democratic. The Electoral College is anti-democratic. The fact that we can't vote for George W. Bush or especially Barack Obama. How many people would like to vote for Barack Obama in 2024? But Constitution says no. One of the amendments, just like the 14th Amendment, says someone who engaged in insurrection or gave aid and comfort to those who did, is ineligible to be president. What I was kind of saying before, to back up my prediction previously, that the Supreme Court is not going to kick Trump off the ballot under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. There are a lot of ways they can punt the issue, like say that Congress has to provide enacting legislation, or there has to be greater procedure than the 5-day bench trial they did in Colorado, or the opinion that the Maine Secretary of State created based on various documents. I mean, the due process argument, I guess, that Molly Hemingway was making, but it's not like there hasn't been some due process, especially in Colorado, where they did this like 5-day bench trial where the district court decided. But that's another way the Supreme Court could kick this whole thing as like a procedural problem where they don't really have to decide the issue, and maybe they can get like a 9-0 decision. Who knows how that will turn out, but I don't think the Supreme Court is going to say Donald Trump can't run for president, because the Supreme Court and courts in general are also political, and they don't want to overturn what might be a political judgment of the majority of the electorate. And that's what I said before, and I stick by that prediction. But before I finish the program, I have one more newsmaker clip, starting off with Maine Secretary of State Shana Bellows explaining her decision right here with Dana Bash on CNN State of the Union, talking to Representative Jamie Raskin, asking him if he's comfortable with a state official making a unilateral decision about a presidential election, which is actually kind of a bogus spin, since she just, under Maine state law, had to make the first decision, and then it goes through the Maine courts, and then she asks about whether Clarence Thomas should recuse himself, and then gets back to Jamie Raskin trying to justify kicking Trump off the ballot. This is kind of a longer clip, but worth watching, from CNN State of the Union yesterday, and I'll talk about it with you a little more after we watch that final newsmaker clip together over here.
And the weight of evidence that I reviewed indicated that it was in fact an insurrection, and Mr. Trump engaged in that insurrection under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment.
That was Maine's Secretary of State explaining her decision to remove Donald Trump from the ballot following a similar decision in Colorado. Now all eyes are on the Supreme Court. Here with me now to discuss is a constitutional expert, top Democrat on the House Oversight Committee, Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland. Thank you for coming in. Again, Happy New Year to you. You've heard Kristen Welker saying it's just politics. It's not just Republicans, though, coming out against this. We've heard Democrats and independents as well saying that they're not comfortable with this. Are you comfortable with one state official making a unilateral decision to take a presidential candidate off the ballot?
Well, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, so we're all governed in our democracy under the rules of the Constitution. And it was actually two very conservative legal scholars who wrote the best, most authoritative law review article on the whole thing, saying that Donald Trump is clearly disqualified from being on the ballot because he participated in insurrection. So this becomes a test for the originalists and the textualists on the Supreme Court. And I think all of the justices from left to right call themselves textualists and originalists. The language of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is very clear. It says if you've sworn an oath to support the Constitution and violated the oath by engaging in insurrection or rebellion, you can never hold public office again. And the original purposes of it are equally clear, because actually when the language was first offered by the radical Republicans in Congress, it was very broad, and it said if you've participated in secession or insurrection, you can never vote again. And when it got over to the Senate, they said that's way too broad. Let's focus in on the worst offenders, people who'd actually sworn an oath to the Constitution and then breached the oath by trying to overthrow the government. And we'll make sure those people never serve in office again. They can vote again. Donald Trump can vote forever as long as he lives, but he has disqualified himself. And we have a number of disqualifications in the Constitution for serving as president. For example, age. I mean, you know, I've got a colleague who's a great young politician, Maxwell Frost. He's 26. He can't run for president. Now, would we say that that's undemocratic? Well, that's the rules of the Constitution. If you don't like the rules of the Constitution, change the Constitution.
3 of the sitting justices were appointed by Donald Trump. And in addition to that, Justice Clarence Thomas's wife, Ginny, texted with Mark Meadows about the 2020 election and the lead up to January 6th, as you will know. Should any of the justices recuse themselves if they take this up?
Well, finally, the Supreme Court has developed a code of ethics. It's not binding in the sense that they're not going to anyone else. They could have gone to, for example, circuit court justices. You could have had state Supreme Court justices on a panel. But so they're deciding for themselves, again, whether they're in violation of their code of ethics. But I think anybody looking at this in any kind of dispassionate, reasonable way would say if your wife was involved in the big lie and claiming that Donald Trump had actually won the presidential election, had been agitating for that and participating in the events leading up to January 6th, that you shouldn't be participating.
So he should recuse himself.
He should. Oh, he absolutely should recuse himself. The question is, what do we do if he doesn't recuse himself?
How quickly do you think that the Supreme Court will weigh in on this, if they will at all? You assume that they will, right?
Yeah. I mean, under constitutional federalism, every state is ultimately going to control its own ballot access and access to candidates for the ballot. And that is obviously difficult when we're talking about electing the president, who is the one official we've got in America who is supposed to represent the entire country, represent everybody. And so I think that the urgency is for the Supreme Court to act. But I think it's going to be tough for some of them if they want to keep Trump on the ballot, if they're falling for the argument that this is undemocratic. I mean, is it undemocratic that Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jennifer Granholm can't run for president because they weren't born in the country? If you think about it, of all the forms of disqualification we have, the one that disqualifies people for engaging in insurrection is the most democratic, because it's the one where people choose themselves to be disqualified. In terms of your age or where you were born, that's not up to you. But Donald Trump is in that tiny, tiny number of people who've essentially disqualified themselves.
You're a constitutional scholar. You're also a politician. What about the argument that this is just going to make him a martyr?
It may or may not. The question is, what does the Constitution say? Donald Trump can strike the pose of the martyr in any given context. If he's allowed to stay on the ballot despite his clear incitement of an insurrection, an attempt to overturn the results in the 2020 election, and he loses to Joe Biden, as he almost certainly would. Biden beat him by more than 7 million votes last time, and we just have millions of young new voters who've joined the rolls, and they can't stand Donald Trump and the Republican Party. If he loses, he will feel himself a martyr there, and he will try to overturn the election result again. So I don't think we can run scared from Donald Trump. We've got to enforce our Constitution, and that certainly was the design of the framers, and that's what they would have us do.
You're far more bullish about Biden beating Trump than other Democrats I've talked to. But I want to move on to something that's going on in your committee. You are ranking Democrat in the Oversight Committee. Your chairman is asking the White House for any documents that President Biden played a role in his son Hunter's decision to defy a subpoena from the Republicans on your committee.
And I just kept that playing to show that the so-called liberal media is not ignoring the whole Hunter Biden story, asking Jamie Raskin about Hunter Biden defying the subpoena from the committee that he serves on. And so that actually happened. But I think Jamie Raskin did a pretty good job of making the argument that Trump should be disqualified from being on the ballot under the 14th Amendment, and also kind of refuting the whole undemocratic argument in a way that you also saw from David Becker in that CBS News Face the Nation clip I showed earlier about the ways that the Constitution is undemocratic, although David Becker didn't really say it, and Jamie Raskin didn't quite say it, but said it a little better, that, like, Arnold Schwarzenegger can't run for president even if the vote, a majority of Americans wanted, to make Arnold Schwarzenegger the president. We couldn't do it because he was born in Austria, or Jennifer Granholm, who was governor of Michigan but born in Canada, also cannot be president of the United States, and that's anti-democratic. But sometimes the Constitution does things, we don't live in a, all these conservatives like to say, we don't live in a democracy, we live in a republic. Well, that's not quite accurate because we don't live in a direct democracy. We live in a democratic republic, which means that our government is selected by a vote of the people, but there are also mechanisms that stop the people from getting anything they want, including the Bill of Rights, including the Electoral College, all sorts of weird mechanisms. I'm not really actually a supporter of the Electoral College, but in general, I'm a big supporter of the Bill of Rights and some things that put a limit on what the Democratic majority can decide. And so maybe, and there are also constitutional limitations on who can run for president. I'm actually not a big supporter of term limits. Maybe it would be good if we could vote for Barack Obama instead of Joe Biden. It probably would be better for the country. And anyway, I guess I'm getting to the end of the program here and kind of winding down the argument that you saw intertwined with all those clips. If you like the media criticism and political commentary I added to the 10 clips I showed you this week, and along with my committing some legal analysis and showing you parts of the Constitution, if you like all that, you can give me a thumbs up right below the video. Hit the like button or subscribe to the channel, or right under the video there are ways to support my channel financially that I talked about earlier. And we're in January 2024, so I'm pretty much in the last year of this live stream. I mean, unless my viewership and financial support increases greatly over the year. Who knows? It's an election year. Maybe it will. But I'm kind of planning to wind it all down in January 2025, after we see who makes it into the presidency after the November 2024 election. It might be the person who gets the most votes, the most popular votes, the person who gets the most electoral votes, or maybe it'll get thrown to the house. Who knows what's going to happen in January 2025? That's why I'm going to keep doing the show for another year at least. But that's it. We're probably in the last year, because Happy New Year, and I appreciate all of you who showed up for the show today, even though it's New Year's Day, or who watch it during the week. I hope to see you every Monday, or those who watch after Monday, all the way through the next year. And unless I come up with some other reason to upload a video in the next week, which seems really unlikely, I guess I'll see you all next Monday and every Monday for the next year. And until next Monday or whatever, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet. Oh, wait, no, I promised the bonus Cheech and Chong clip that I never showed. Sorry about that. Here, I showed Chong earlier in a live shot, but here is Cheech and Chong on the bed, where you can really hear how Chong purrs very loudly while being licked by his brother Cheech over here. And there you saw the bonus Cheech and Chong clip. And Cheech has shown up for the end of the show here for a live shot. So now I've shown you Chong earlier, and here's Cheech. For the most loyal viewers who stuck it out all the way to 1 hour and 18 minutes plus of the live stream, you got to see the bonus Cheech and Chong clip, the bonus Cheech and Chong clip, and you actually got to see Cheech live on camera. And anyway, I guess until next Monday or whatever, I'll be seeing you all around the internet.